Well, hello. A very warm welcome to our webinar this morning. It's great to have you with us. I'm Kate Pritchard. I head up the consultancy team at People Insight, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Sam this morning, who's also a culture expert at People Insight. We both have many years of experience in this field of employee experience, and Sam's actually spent the last few years focusing on supporting organisations to build and sustain thriving cultures. So Sam is very well placed to be leading on this session today, Culture versus Engagement, why both deserve your focus. So before we start and dive into the content, I just want to cover a little bit of housekeeping for you. Firstly, this is a short session. We do just have 30 minutes together. We are recording this session and we will make sure that you get a copy of that recording following the session. We also want to let you know that we are here to help. If you would like a follow-up conversation with one of our experts, you can book a time. My colleague Ryan will post a little calendar into the chat so that you can book a time that is convenient to you. And we'd love this to be an interactive session. So you can give us feedback via emojis on the reactions option of the toolbar, but also please do use the chat option to contribute to the conversation this morning. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love you to ask any questions and to engage in the discussion here. And actually, to kick that off, we do have a quick question for you, if that's okay. We'd love to know, how would you describe your company culture in just 3 words? So please take a moment just to think about that and just type your answers into the chat. We'd love to hear how you're describing your company culture at the moment. And I'm going to let Sam just study and enjoy those 3 words as they come through, while I give you a very quick introduction to People Insight for the benefit of those of you who don't know us. So we're employee experience specialists. We're dedicated to helping our clients to transform survey insights into meaningful and impactful actions. And we achieve this through 3 main channels. We have a really powerful platform, which is used to conduct employee surveys and to deliver results in an intuitive, user-friendly way. We have an excellent team who provide expert support at each stage, from questionnaire design through to supporting managers to use their data effectively. And we really focus on action. We're really committed to supporting our clients to take action on the basis of these insights. Today, we're obviously talking about culture, so it's really about achieving positive change in culture as well as in engagement. We're privileged at People Insight to work with a great number of organisations across a wide variety of industry sectors. And here are just a few of our current clients to sort of demonstrate the coverage of organisations that we work with. But without further ado, I think we should dive straight into the question that's at the heart of our webinar today, which is why both culture and engagement need focus to ensure that our organisation's vision and strategy can be achieved. So I'm going to hand over to Sam to really kick us off.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Kate, and good morning. So lovely to see lots of you here today, and thanks for your 3 words. Keep those coming. I'm going to come on to those in a little bit. We've already got some very interesting words coming through, so bring those in and we'll touch on those in a little bit. But let's just dive straight in then. So first, I'd like us to think about engagement and culture through the lens of how they support strategic success and what it looks like when one or the other is maybe not quite right. So the strategy, of course, sets out the vision and how aims will be achieved, and it maps out how to reach that glorious destination, which is all important for aligning people's understanding and efforts. And I've made an assumption here that that the strategic alignment is in good order, so that is something you can check through your employee surveys. But then you need to get people on board and establish an emotional connection with the organisation and vision. And this is where engagement comes in. And I think many of us here today are quite familiar with the concept of engagement and surveys. But we want people to feel motivated and committed to reaching that destination. And we want them to be advocating for the company and encouraging others to get on board that ship. So we would typically measure employee engagement through surveys and track it through pulses and things like that. And we can also use that data to see the aspects of wider employee experience that are having the strongest impact on engagement. But engagement alone is just not enough. You can sometimes have engaged staff, but it can feel like they're being held back. And I think that's probably because engagement is only considering what is above the water level. So if culture isn't fit for purpose, then a bit like a riptide, it's going to just sweep your organization off course. And I think whether people are fully aware of it or not, a culture does exist, and we absolutely need to know if that culture is fit for purpose or not. So a great example of this in the aviation industry, say through the 70s and 80s, a lack of psychological safety in the culture then was contributing to some of the crashes that took place. And that's what happened to a United Airlines flight. This was in the late 70s. There was a landing gear issue and the captain was just deliberating for too long. The fuel was almost out and the engineer was only just politely hinting at that fuel problem, just not wanting to challenge the captain. And it wasn't a good ending. And there's so much that we've learned from that industry, and they've really managed to transform culture. And I think we can see from that just how important it is that culture is contributing, yes, to an engaging experience, but also it has to align with strategy. I think sometimes it can just slip towards the left and jar against things that people love about their work or the organization. And you might see this in times of rapid growth, for example. Sometimes it might actually be a necessary shift, but if you are making that shift, you want it to be an intentional one. And it can also swing towards the right. So this will be, your people-pleasing cultures. And I think if we're sticking with the nautical theme, these will be the party ships. So I think flexible working might be a really interesting current example. So I think employee feedback would tell us how much people value flexible working, and it certainly really helped with inclusive culture and bringing people in so that they can contribute their best. But we have to make sure it doesn't come at the detriment of teams being able to work effectively together. So just really keeping an eye on both culture and engagement and how they're aligned with the strategy.
Oh, thank you, Sam. That's a really useful starting point. I guess, probably what we should do right at the top here is just to really define engagement and culture so that we're all really clear about these terms. And I'm aware that pretty much everyone on the call will be very familiar with the term of engagement. And there's lots of different ways that can be described. But I suppose essentially what we're looking at is the emotional connection that people have with their organisation. As you've mentioned, it's something that we can not only define, but very clearly measure and take action to improve levels of employee engagement. But let's talk a bit more about culture.
Yeah, sure. And I think you may have your own definition of culture. If you've got your own definition that you like, pop those in the chat and let's see those. I think probably the most common one that we hear is culture is the way that we do things. And our definition expands on that really. So for me, it's the shared experience of culture that is key here, in that it's reflecting our group habits and beliefs, and it's something that's really deeply instilled in people. And I'd say it's different from engagement in that there is no right culture. So in engagement and employee experience, you're always aiming for those higher scores. But culture is more like the personality of an organization, and it is more messy. So when you're investigating culture, it's a bit like pulling on that ball of wool, so not being quite sure perhaps of how it might unravel. And so I think this means it requires that deeper work just to understand it and to decide on what the best culture is. And ideally, that deeper work would be group work, because you're exploring those collective beliefs, those collective stories, if you like.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. So let's just start by talking about some of the pitfalls associated with culture, some of the challenges. And you did mention one at the outset, which is around sometimes the culture and the strategy not being completely aligned. But I know there are others. Do you want to talk through some more?
Yeah, and I just have to say I love this icon. So I hope no one in the audience is feeling like this, but yeah, certainly it can, with that first one, just feel like the culture can sweep you, of course, with strategy. But there are others. I think there's quite a few, but I'll just talk through perhaps some of the more common ones. And if these sound familiar to you, let us know if you're observing these as well. But let's take off this second challenge. And so trying to be everything to everyone. I think organisations can fall into this trap of just trying to adopt multiple or possibly conflicting culture styles. So, for example, striving for a high performance culture, but also trying to be being a caring and collaborative one, or trying to be stable and risk averse, but also creative and innovative. And I think this unfocused kind of culture can cause confusion, often actually maybe coming from leaders with different ideas as to what the culture might need to be. And with that tension, employees will struggle just to understand actually what is truly valued within the organisation and how should they be doing things. Beyond that, there's this other great challenge that I think we see a lot, which is allowing subcultures to dominate. So in organisations where there's no strong cultural core, I think departments will have their own microcultures and they'll compete and cause tension. And that can make the cross-team working really hard. And I think so subcultures will be completely normal. I say they're actually necessary because you do need to enable some local flexibility. But there has to be that overarching cultural thread just to help connect them. And then finally, perhaps one that we might see the most through our employee surveys and get clues on from that is just promoting values that aren't felt to be genuinely practiced. So it's no good having values on mouse mats or mugs. I'm not even sure does anyone have mouse mats anymore? We used to have them on mouse mats. And if you don't see them being lived, this really just highlights that gap between the stated and lived values, and that can really damage trust. I think this is particularly felt by employees if they feel that leaders aren't role modelling the company values. Perhaps also for harder to reach operational staff, their manager might be the only contact they have with the organisation. Effectively, their manager is the organisation. So it's just so important that managers understand values and can embody them as well. So if you see any of these challenges, do these sound familiar to you? Let us know in the chat. Kate, I don't know if you also see some of these in your work.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from employees surveys, they absolutely do come through. It's quite common that we see challenges around different departments working together effectively. And as you've just mentioned, around the values not necessarily being lived and not aligned with the stated values. So yes, absolutely common pitfalls. So I suppose what we're articulating here is that culture is really complex. It can be really challenging. There are pitfalls, and it is really important that we do have clarity in terms of what our culture is and also what we want it to be. So we've designed a framework to really help our clients to understand culture a little bit better. And perhaps you could talk us through this, Sam.
Yeah, of course. And I think whilst culture is unique to an organisation, it is important to try and describe it in a consistent way. And we have evolved the competing values framework to define 8 culture styles to support culture assessment. I think our clients who have found this particularly useful for just enabling those informed discussions amongst staff and leaders alike. So to start with, there are 2 axes to separate. First, the flexible and focused culture styles. So at the top here, we've got flexible. Flexible styles allow organisations to be more adaptable. And I can actually see lots of your words towards this top end of the wheel, sort of suggesting the more flexible styles. Focused styles are geared towards more clarity and control. And then we bring in the horizontal axis. So this is to distinguish whether an organisation has an internal focus, so on employees and processes, or more of an external one, so looking to the market and changes in the external environment. And that gives us these 4 quadrants. So we've got create, win, control, and nurture. And within these are our 8 styles. Now, I think it will rarely be that there is just one style that neatly reflects your culture. Many of these styles will be present in some way, but there are usually 1, 2, or 3 that stand out that will feel more prevalent. And I think that's what we want to establish in a culture assessment, the 1 or 2 styles that are showing up the most. And perhaps looking at your words, you'll see which resonates. So certainly towards the top of the wheel, some of those early ones, progressive, inclusive, fast-paced, inclusive, learning, ever-changing. Those are very much top of the wheel type styles. I think some of you here today are in progress with defining your culture, but some of you already have cultures that are already well defined, but it's useful to ask then if it's is that the right culture? Do you have the right styles, or will they need refining or reshaping? So using this kind of language, you can have those informed discussions. And so just to bring that to life a bit more and go through these, we've got up to the top left of the wheel here, top right. We've got curious. So this is about encouraging problem solving, innovation and creativity, much like your words here. I can see things like growing and evolving. And so like 3M, they known for producing tools like Post-it notes, which is one of my favorite facilitation tools. They've got a 15% rule. So that means employees can dedicate up to 15% of their working time just to pursuing personal ideas outside of their assigned responsibility. So really creating space there for that creativity. Then you've got autonomous up in that quadrant. So Netflix is an example of this, where employees have quite minimal oversight and teams are trusted to make the decisions, in the best interest of the company. I think you also see these styles a lot in smaller companies and startups. But if we jump over to the other side of the wheel, then, so we're now looking at the bottom left here. So we've got the style, ordered. We're in the control quadrant now, and ordered is very much exemplified by McDonald's, which operates with a highly structured organizational culture. They've got clearly defined roles and procedures, and they prioritize standardization in their franchise network. And if you go to McDonald's, you'll know that the experience is pretty consistent for the customer. And this is true of companies like Cafe Nero, or perhaps those high-end restaurants where, in the kitchens, those processes and control is absolutely paramount. We've then got stable. So stable styles are all about maintaining predictability. They want to prioritize being reliable, dependable, quality, and minimizing risk. And I think IBM is a really good example of this. They've got quite a structured approach to decision making, clear structures, and they do have change, but it's more incremental and controlled. I think there's a very useful reason for having this wheel, which is that the styles opposite each other don't sit well together, so they create tension. I think the tension here is essentially the progress versus perfection debate. And sometimes organizations might want to encourage more creativity, but they're also trying to protect quality and reliability, and it's quite hard to get that balance right. So Kate, maybe you've seen, I don't know if you felt this in organizations you work with, actually.
Yeah, I think when you were talking about control, I was certainly thinking of some of our public sector clients and their, high focus here, and how that can make it more challenging to really open up the creativity, and having to be very intentional about that.
Yeah, I think you can. It's not impossible to have opposite styles. It's much harder though, and I think it has to be a conscious balance. So there was an investment management firm I was working with who had responsible and entrepreneurial to help consciously balance that. We've then got competitive cultures like Amazon, who focus on dominating the marketplace. You'd get supermarkets here like Tesco. You've got goal-driven cultures like Tesla, who sort of have those really ambitious, target-focused elements. And then if we look to the top left, we've got in our nurture quadrant the supportive style, so prioritizing teamwork, collaboration. And Pixar had the really famous example of moving the toilets further away just to enable more collaboration and some of those unplanned chats. And I think we see that a lot with our university clients as well, that on the campus, they've got lots of those lovely informal conversations as people meet around the campus. And then finally, inclusive. So this is that family feel, caring style that aims to make everyone feel valued and included and heard. And Patagonia is a great example of that. They really promote that family-like atmosphere, and they've got great benefits such as on-site childcare and a let my people go surfing policy, which is one of my favorites. So you can just see how the focus really shifts depending on the styles that you have. And again, if you've got nurture and win styles showing up, there's likely to be tension. It's quite difficult to get collaborative and people-focused styles alongside that performance-driven culture as well.
Yeah, and I've seen that when organizations are growing, or maybe a new leader who has a slightly different take on things, and it moves over from nurture to win, it can be quite a difficult transition. That's really helpful. Thank you, Sam. So I think that really helps to sort of bring it to life in terms of really understanding the different types of culture, which are really like a personality of the organisation. But I guess, moving forward, we need to think about what practically we can do with this information and how we could maybe transform culture. So could you talk us through that, please?
Yeah, and I think quite often culture is felt to be a rather large and nebulous area, and I suppose it is more messy and complex. So we just want to make it as practical as possible to assess and shape. So there are 3 steps to break down how we would approach culture transformation. And what we do when we support clients with this is first just to assess current culture so you can identify your most prevalent culture styles. And I think even if you've already got a well-defined culture, just trying to check in and see if that's the right culture, are those current styles what you would expect to be, can be a really useful stage. So using the data from your employee surveys, that gives you such a rich and excellent head start, and different clues on the subcultures as well across departments. But then you really just need to get out there and talk to people. And that qualitative work is important for two reasons. One, you get that deeper understanding, but also you're encouraging people just to become more aware of what that culture is. And I think that's probably the first step to being able to change it. So we would run interactive workshops or interviews with this just to get people consciously thinking about the way things are done. And a definition of culture that I love is culture is what gets tolerated. So a great question to ask, or could be to ask, is, well, what are we tolerating that we shouldn't be? And just asking people to tell stories about times they felt they've been really thriving, times they've not, to see which culture styles they think are showing up and if that's a good thing or not. And you can get clues maybe from other metrics, retention, occurrence of grievances, joiner surveys, sites like Glassdoor. These all scratch the surface of culture and give you the warning signs for when a fuller culture assessment might be required. And then I'd be leaping into this qualitative work. Step 2 then is identifying your ideal culture style. So this absolutely would have to be done with leadership to set the culture ambition. And part of this process is just making sure that they are collectively agreeing. I don't know if you see this in your leadership teams, but you can have quite different personalities who will naturally lean to maybe different parts of that culture will. So just trying to get them to collectively agree on the direction is a success in itself. And then, of course, comes the gap analysis. So you can set out a roadmap for the culture transformation. It doesn't have to be a transformation. It might just be tweaking and refining your culture just to make sure it's keeping on track with your values and your culture ambition. But part of this is just checking in on that values design and making sure they are anchoring your culture and really resonating with people as well. So sometimes your values are just fine, but actually maybe they're just a bit bland, or they're just not connecting with people, and they need to be guiding how people should be showing up at work. But there's more to it. I say there's more to the roadmap, just because it's not about mindsets and behaviours in isolation. We do have to look at what else is going on in the organisation. What are the other organisational factors that might be helping or hindering that ideal culture? And I had a little nose at our benchmark data, and it's a bit of a stark picture actually, but some organisations, or it seems organisations, actually do a good job of making their values understood. So we've got 82% of employees saying they tend to understand the values in their organisation, but this drops down to 67% for people feeling that they are lived, which is one of those pitfalls we talked about earlier. And I think it's usually because one or more of these areas is holding the culture back. So this is our culture shape model, which is a summary of the levers at your disposal to support culture transformation. And maybe you've been working on some of these areas, or if you've been working on something just to really help the values being lived, then please share them with us. We'd love to know. But stories is about leaders and managers and the stories that they're telling, their leadership styles. Who are the heroes and villains in their stories, and what do they focus on when they're celebrating successes and communicating with staff? That absolutely needs to mirror the cultural ambition. Hardwiring, this is structures, physical environment, like in the Pixar example, and how we project culture through flexible working, I think, has become a really interesting challenge recently as well. And physical symbols. So for operational employees I was working with, they used to have a logo on their uniform, and that was taken off to save costs. But it turned out that logo was a really important representation of their profession and responsibilities, and sort of a visible connection to the organisation and the culture. So that logo was put back on. Abilities, some people will thrive better in some cultures than others, and how you recruit and how you develop really matters. So we use team profiling, and that works really well here for helping teams to understand, well, how do they personally relate to the culture? What are their working preferences? How do they adapt? And then we've got processes. So this is a big one, but processes for things like reward, onboarding, decision making, they are all things to consider here. And then finally, experience, which is recognizing that culture doesn't really sit still. You have to keep the conversations going to measure how culture is showing up in employee experience. And it's that connection that you're always just trying to be mindful of. What's going on with employee experience and engagement, and what's going on with culture. But you can use your engagement surveys, your pulse surveys, culture surveys. These are all really useful tools to give you clues on culture, that sort of surface level check-in. And then you can look out for any warning signs and just see, measure, are things progressing as you would want? And I'm not saying that we would address all of this. You're turning, oil tankers here. But it's looking at which of these levers would give you the best impact, and how can you pace it out over a longer term roadmap just to make culture shaping and transformation a bit more manageable.
Lovely. Thank you, Sam. You've covered a lot, certainly lots of food for thought here. I think some of my key takeaways is, you've really been very clear in sort of explaining that cultures exist. They're always present, whether they're clearly defined or not. There is a risk if it's not clearly articulated. So aligning it with strategy and with engagement is really important to ensure that we don't hinder progress. And taking time to really understand our culture as well as the employee experience, and making sure that we can shape how the culture needs to evolve to support our organisational goals is really important. And obviously at People Insight, we are here to provide that support, and we'd love to continue this conversation. This has really just been a very quick webinar to sort of introduce this topic, but we would love to speak more about it. So our details are here. If you would like to keep the conversation going and reach out to us, we would really love to hear from you after the webinar. And actually, to spark some more thoughts on this topic, perhaps you'd like to take our little culture quiz. So this is available on our website and via this QR code, and it would be interesting to see what you discover there. I'd also just like to wrap up by saying that we do very regular webinars, and we actually have our next one next week. It's aimed primarily at our HE clients, but Edinburgh Napier University are going to be talking about their survey journey to date, and also their plans to adopt a continuous listening strategy. And then we have an employee engagement trends webinar at the end of January. At the moment, we're writing a report about our thoughts for 2025 and beyond, and we'll be sharing some of the insights from that very soon. So that is it for today. We really appreciate you joining. Thank you so much for your time. We will be planting trees as part of our Rooting for Change initiative, to thank you for coming along today. Many thanks.